The Rugby Paper Podcast has brought up its half century. To celebrate episode 50, we have an absolute cracker as we preview this year's Six Nations. Joining me and the full house of columnists in Chris Hewett, Nick Cain and Brendan Gallagher is the first ever special guest on the Rugby Paper Podcast in the form of former England centre and British and Irish Lion Jerry Guscott. It's a big episode, a big episode. It's the 50th episode of the Rugby Paper Podcast. So happy half century, everyone. It's exactly a year since the start of the Rugby Paper Podcast. And for the first time, our lovely faces will be on YouTube. So if you're watching at home, you can now see our faces to your displeasure or pleasure. And to commemorate a year, we've got the very first special guest on the Rugby Paper Podcast back with us again. Former England centre and British and Irish Lion, Jerry Guscott. How are you doing, Jerry?
I'm all good and looking forward to chatting with these rugby experts, many, all of whom I know incredibly well. It's back to be back in circulation.
Well, absolutely. And we do have a full house. We've got Nick Cain, Brendan Gallagher, and I'm just going to give a shout out to Chris Hewett, who is making his first appearance in 2023. How was Down Under, Chris?
It's probably happier in Australia than it is in England at the moment, or in the UK, but that's not saying much. And their rugby union is not actually at the level of hassle that we're seeing at Twickenham or in Cardiff or in Paris. So if it was a Six Nations of rugby governance incompetence, I think that three of the biggest nations around would be in the bottom three places, would they not?
That's interesting. Look, we'll get to it. I don't know whether our listeners are freed from the pleasure of your absence or will be rejoicing at your return, but I think England's a little bit happier for having you back, Chris. So let's get to it.
You make my point for me.
Let's get to it. We've got so much to discuss. Six Nations time in a World Cup year. Now, the Six Nations in World Cup year is always massive. To me, this one feels particularly massive. And Jerry, I'm going to come to you straight away. We felt on the Rugby Paper Podcast that the autumn asked more questions than it answered, certainly from a home nation's perspective, perhaps with the exception of Ireland. It's sort of all happening. Do you agree that there's so much up in the air and so much that the Six Nations could potentially address?
I love the Six Nations, loved watching it as a kid, loved playing in it, and now really enjoy watching. You can't help but get excited, especially if you manage to get a ticket to the game. The atmosphere around every single stadium, every single country is huge, and I just love it. If I'm a player in Ireland and France, I'm really looking forward to it. If I'm in the other nations, I'm thinking, wow, how are we going to do? And the first game is massively important, as always. The autumn internationals, I thought it put everybody in their place where they are in the pecking order. England really carried on with poor performances and really got results to reflect their performance. I think, Wales, we didn't think it could get any worse losing to Italy, but it did. And those two countries have made big changes behind the scenes with coaches, new coaches on board. I'm really looking forward to seeing how well France do in this massive year for them. The pressure of being Grand Slam champions, playing at home, the World Cup just around the corner. And Ireland, can they maintain their great form? Will they lose it going into the World Cup? Can they maintain it going through the Six Nations? And I think those two at the top, and the rest, Italy will always be at the bottom. And the three, Wales, England and Scotland, will fight it out amongst themselves for third.
We've got everyone's predictions. We'll get to that in a second. But Brendan, I asked you something similar to this time last year about how competitive the Six Nations would be. I'm not going to ask the same question, but rather, Italy shocked Australia and Wales last year. Scotland nearly shocked the All Blacks, came within 1 point of beating Australia, beat Argentina. Do you think this is the highest standard of Six Nations in your memory, and that we've got the top two nations in the world, as well as, the bottom two being very competitive worldwide?
Yeah, it has to be up there, doesn't it? Like you say, first and second in the world. Italy likely to contest the issue in most of the games, I would have thought. And as Jerry was saying, there's going to be a sort of lump in the middle where there's nothing much to choose between them. World Cup years are funny though, aren't they? They don't necessarily transfer to the World Cup. I mean, I remember '99, France finished bottom, didn't they? I think was it a whitewash or just one win? A couple of months later, they get to the World Cup final, beat New Zealand in that famous semi-final. And I certainly get the feeling with France this year, for example, that they're not at full pelt yet. And I don't know, I think it's probably subconscious, but this is the most important year in the careers of all those people involved. They'll never have a bigger tournament, home World Cup. I'm not sure that absolutely flat out. In the autumn, I got the impression that they weren't engaging top gear very often. Now, Six Nations is a manic, frantic, exhilarating tournament. I think they're going to have to up it again if they want to contest it, go toe-to-toe with Ireland this year. But I still just get the impression we're not getting the full France yet.
Why do you think that is? You think that's a personnel type thing, or you think it's the nature of peaking for a World Cup?
I think it's probably peaking, and these guys are a lot as expected. On the Toulouse guys were involved all last season, and European competition, busy autumn, Six Nations, and then home World Cup. You can only go to the World so many times. And I just get the feeling one or two are not soft pedaling, but that they're not maxing out like they would if it was the World Cup now. So I think that has to be factored into the France performance. Also, they're away to Ireland and England, which is never a great year for them. It's always a bit difficult. So them and Ireland are undoubtedly the leaders, the favourites going into the tournament. But like I say, World Cup years can be slightly odd, Six Nations. It can go either way.
Nick, do you agree with that? Do you agree that by the end of this tournament, obviously it's an opportunity to stake a claim, but with two of the six countries now in a transformative phase under new coaches as well, it's not going to provide necessarily all the answers, but potentially more enticing questions as well?
Well, I think it's going to have to provide a hell of a lot of answers for everybody. And I think that Ireland and France are obviously still well ahead of the game after the autumn. France on 13 match unbeaten streak with a Grand Slam and a win over South Africa. So I'm not convinced that they won't rise to the Six Nations occasion. It's weird. In any assessment of the Six Nations, you always look at what the home and away split is. And this time round, the two strongest nations have only got two home games. So that does mean, France have got to go to Dublin and Twickenham. And I think England, probably by round 3, will be a stiffer test than they would be earlier on in the tournament. So, look, I think that, Scotland, England and Wales have got a lot of ground to make up. And I think that France and Ireland are ticking over pretty nicely. And, for teams with only two home games, I still think that they'll finish in 1 and 2.
Let's start with England then. Jerry, in your column, I think it came out about a week ago for the Rugby Paper, maybe a little bit less than that. You spoke about England's flyers on the wing. And I remember this time last year, you mentioned Adam Radwan by name. He's obviously not going to be one of those. But for those who haven't read the column just yet, who are your starting wingers and why are they the key to unlocking England's recently stolting attack?
I know one was Hassel Collins. Who did I pick on the other one?
Malins it was.
Yeah, Max Malins. Max Malins I've always liked as a player. His skill set is wonderful. He can do everything in my book, I feel. He played as a youngster, I believe, at 10 quite a bit. I think you can tell just he reads the game so well. He anticipates a lot of what's going on alongside him, behind him, and in front. He just has good game intellect, and that's so important at this level, to be ahead. Whilst he's not the quickest, he's certainly by no means the slowest. He can step off both feet. He's got decent acceleration, top end speed, decent in the tackle, and good under the high ball, which I think the back three is essential, that you have that ability to compete for ball and keep the ball when it's coming to you safe. Hassel Collins, I've not seen a great deal of, but you look at the stature of the man. I mean, he's 6'3" got to be 16 stone-ish, and he runs well, and he's elusive. And I think the England backline has relied on the heft of Manu Tuilagi for so long, and when he plays at his best, he can attract 2, sometimes 3 defenders. Why that's so crucial is it narrows the defence. It just sucks in players that are on the outside hoping to look after the attack, but because it takes more than one person to take Manu, you step in, and that narrows the defence and leaves more space on the outside. I think Hassel Collins can do exactly the same, and that's always good. So if you think of Manu playing at his best, Hassel Collins coming into the line or even smashing down the wing, plus Freddie Stewart, that's some decent heft that straightens the line and allows some space for the quicker players.
Am I right? Oh, sorry, Chris.
How do you square the argument of size on the wing at the moment, Jerry, with the fact that a number of nations, most notably the Springboks, weirdly, who have been size obsessed ever since the late 19th century, are going for small wings? You had Darcy Graham, you got the 2 relatively small wings in Wales. You've got Villiers in France. There does seem to be, it's slightly counterintuitive, isn't it, in this day and age, that so many small stature wings are making their way into the test.
I don't think there's any harm in picking the best players. It doesn't matter what size they are. If they're playing the best rugby, all-round rugby, then you have to pick them. They're putting their hand up. They're scoring tries. They're beating players. The big thing with wings is that the aerial game is so important. If you do pick a smaller player, they've got to be unbelievably good in the air, because you lose so much ground there. You think of the amount of box kicking that goes up down the tram lines. And if you've got someone who's 5'7" against someone who's 6'3" or 4, you're not going to win many. So you're not going to regain the ball a lot, and you're not going to put a lot of pressure on. You're going to be under pressure under your own ball. It just so happens that a lot of these, there's a lot of emphasis on defence these days. And the wing and the fullback positions are so exposed that your tackle success rate is generally in the 70s. Now, if you had that tackle success rate in the 70s in the centre, you would not play for your national team. I can guarantee it. That's such a poor record, such a poor success rate. But the wings and the fullbacks, everybody understands that exposure. If Radwan was winning high balls, making massive tackles, scoring the tries that he is, and beating the defenders he is, he'd be in the team. But the other guys are doing that a little bit more. That's much more important at this level.
Chris, while we're on the subject, I think all 3 of us, Chris, you weren't here at the time when we picked our England 15 for the start of the Six Nations. We did have Hassel Collins. Would you have Hassel Collins? And if so, who would be your other winger as well?
I think it purely depends on the kind of game England are looking to play. I'm slightly surprised that Johnny May's fallen as far as he has in the pecking order. Although the bloke that catches my eye at Gloucester repeatedly is Ollie Thorley, who has sort of been bouncing around.
Do you just want Gloucester? Do you just want Gloucester to play against Scotland?
Sorry.
Do you just want Gloucester to play against Scotland? I mean, you've just named 2 Gloucester players.
I want Mike Teague at number 8 and Mike. I think that will sort out a number of England's problems. They may not win the game, but it's interesting because I think May down the years has put so much on his game, and he goes looking for far more work than he once did. So I was just slightly surprised that he was dropped like a stone. Hassel Collins, I think, to my mind, pays the price slightly for being in a slightly, I would hesitate to call London Irish an anonymous side, but they're not a headline grabbing side at the moment. They do play a particularly expansive kind of game, a counter-attacking kind of game, and they do have the players capable of doing that. And you saw quite a bit of it at the weekend when they played Quins. So I can see the sense of playing at least one substantially sized wing, the Blacks are doing that with Caleb Clark, and if Hassel Collins has got it, I don't have an issue. I don't have an issue at all, actually, with that selection. I think it would encourage me, actually, if Steve Borthwick was adventurous in a couple of positions, because that would tell us that Steve has a more imaginative streak than many people credit him with. I suspect Borthwick is an extremely good selector, or will has the makings of being an extremely good selector. If he wants to go left field and give a very inexperienced player a run in the Calcutta Cup match first up, good on him. I don't have a problem at all. As far as the other wing is concerned, I wonder about Maidens defensively at times, but I do think he's one of those players. He's a bit of a sort of Chris Ashton with brains, in the way that Damian Penno is a Chris Ashton with brains. I think his support play, his ability to get on people's shoulders, read lines from far out, is extremely valuable. And I do think there's something about him going forward. Whether he's good enough in defence under pressure, I think we'll probably find out.
While we're on the back line, in your England back line, in your column again, Joe, I'll refer to that again. You had Henry Slade at 13. Henry Slade's now obviously been ruled out with injury. Who comes in then? Obviously, we've got the ever-impending conundrum of the Smith-Farrell axis, which, you know, we've had a few conversations in the past few weeks about that, to say that that come to the fore again. Jerry, do you think that could ever work? And if not, who's your 13, presuming you're keeping Manu at 12?
I've been made to sound and look a fool the amount of times I said that the Farrell-Ford combination just doesn't work, but their results in the past have proven otherwise. The balance of it just doesn't seem right to me, and I don't think teams have exploited what I see as a weakness, is that they're both slow, or they were slow. So for me, the Smith-Farrell axis doesn't work, because Farrell is not an out-and-out inside centre. He doesn't play there enough. He doesn't run like an inside centre. He doesn't look like an inside centre. He doesn't understand the game and the purpose of an inside centre. He's an adequate receiver of the ball, more than adequate, but in that position, he's not the boss. The 10 is generally the boss of the game, and that's where I feel you get the best out of Owen Farrell, is playing him at 10. And only at 10. So even if Smith was on the bench, don't move Owen into inside centre and bring on Marcus, because there's no point, there's nothing for the forwards to focus on, because you never see Owen run that line that a Manu can run, or a Jamie Roberts used to run, or even a Will Carling going back in time used to run. It's just not in his nature. And I think England performed best with that target for a forward, or a number of forwards to hit. So I would play Farrell at 10, Manu at 12. And I'd actually go for Joe Marchant at 13. I think Ollie Lawrence has been playing well at Bath, but his performances for England, and you can make up you could come up with a number of reasons why, but only he knows why. He hasn't been able to perform for as well as he did at Worcester, and he has been at Bath at the highest level. So I just think Marchant has more experience. I think he's better at outside centre. The big challenge is to fill the Slade void of defence. No, Henry's not the biggest tackler, but he understands that outside centre role brilliantly. That you stop that outside space being used. You have to be an intelligent defender, and I think that's what he's born known as, rather than attacking and scoring tries. But I would go for Marchant. I think he's just got that bit more experience at that level, and at outside centre.
It's worth saying that we're recording on the Tuesday leading up to the Six Nations, and the England team isn't out. Guys, I've read, and these are obviously not corroborated sources, that Farrell and Smith axis will probably be happening again, but I don't know if Nick, Chris, Brendan, you guys have heard any different.
I certainly haven't heard any different, but it's bewildering. Somebody did a Twitter yesterday, or was it 2 days ago, before Slade and Kelly withdrew, and there's something like 26 different combinations that you could theoretically do at sort of 10, 12, 13. And only Steve Borthwick knows what he wants. in an ideal world, I think it's either Farrell or Smith at 10, but I think they might go with Farrell at 12. He's not an out-and-out world-class 12, but he's pretty good. And at the moment, I think England have got a slight crisis in midfield. They don't really know exactly what they want. They've got inexperienced players. And I don't know how Borthwick views Ollie Lawrence. Ollie Lawrence is never a 12. We've had this conversation before. I've watched him since he was 15. He's an out-and-out 13. He's got quick feet. He's fast. He's got hands. He's not manual. He doesn't truck it up. And that's where Eddie Jones went completely wrong with him. He just doesn't truck it up, and he doesn't want the ball to truck it up. He wants a little bit of space. Whether they're going to be brave enough to pick him at 13 with Farrell at 12. See, Joe Marchant, he's a very good, versatile back wing. And yeah, he looks like he's got the makings of a 13, but he's played not a great deal of rugby there. So, do you pitch him in ahead of somebody like Lawrence, who is a centre? I think he's an outside centre at 13, but he has been picked as a 12. But at least he plays there week in, week out. So, like I was saying, we don't know what Steve Borthwick is thinking. He might be absolutely nailed on in his own mind what he wants, and we might be disappearing up our own backsides here trying to come up with a combination, and he already knows it, and it's not a problem.
We talk about the confusion in midfield. I mean, if they continue with the Farrell Smith experiment, and it doesn't work again, they're getting themselves in deeper and deeper water, and I think that we saw enough in the autumn to know that it's not something, I think, that at the beginning of a Six Nations you want to be betting in. If you're going on a tour or something like that, then maybe. But I sort of I agree with Jerry. I think that it's got to be, Farrell's been playing very well at 10. It's got to be Farrell at 10 or Smith at 10. And that it's not just Borthwick. He's brought in Nick Evans. And Nick Evans presumably will have a say in what he thinks. He's already sort of hedged and said that he thinks that almost anything can work. So it remains to be seen what happens. But the idea that Steve Borthwick is going to be an outstanding selector. Well, he's certainly got a few conundrums that are going to be a measure of that.
I think Brendan makes a compelling point about Marchant and what different places, positions he's played, and he's more, he's versatile, he's a bit of a utility, and I would be swayed by that. I just look at Ollie Lawrence and I wonder about his defence, and I just think a quicker person, and I think Marchant's probably quicker than Lawrence, fares better in that role. I think one thing though that is, I think, apparently clear to me is that without a dominant pack, when you play a lightweight 12, you are relying on that pack being dominant. And if they're not dominant, you will go sideways because you have no direct punch to narrow that defence and get the defence interested, unless you've got two other monster wings that can attract the defence. So, and England haven't been dominant up front. Their ball carrying they've not been winning collisions. They've not been creating much momentum. And if their pack isn't doing it, Owen Farrell cannot do it from 12. You'd have to rely on Hassel Collins coming in, Stewart coming in. You're asking them to do something that they don't ordinarily do week in, week out. You're asking Farrell to do something he doesn't do week in, week out. And that's where the problems and the challenges come. I just don't think it's fair when you've got enough talent there to do the job properly. Owen is a world-class 10. He's a blimmin' average, very, very average 12.
When you talk about the dominance of the pack and how that connects to what you can and cannot do with certain personnel in the threes, pass your mind back to 2015. Jerry, the Wallabies got to a World Cup final, which for 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour, they looked as though they might even win the thing, even though the All Blacks got away from them in the end. They played Gitto at 12, who was small, but he was a 10 effectively, and they didn't have, crikey, heaven knows the Wallabies didn't have a dominant pack.
But they had a pretty big outside centre whose name was Kuradrani.
Well, that's my point about Manu Tuilagi being a 13.
I think what you have here though is a culture and a way of playing. You could pick a New Zealand 5'7", 5'8" centre who probably weighs 14 stone, soaking wet. I bet he can run an awesome line from 12. He just knows how to run that line. Owen Farrell doesn't.
Yeah.
Matt Giteau can run that line because he's a footballer and he's quick. He's got the pace where Farrell hasn't got anywhere near that pace and that direct running. And that's why he will not ever create momentum from that, because he's not quick enough off the mark and he's not a destructive runner. Giteau comes from a culture. It's abrasive. It's confrontational. We're not from that culture.
So I think that's a really good point, Jerry. Actually, and you if I was making an argument, you've just destroyed it. But I mean, you can use an example, can't you, of Geordie Barrett, who a year ago no one would have thought he was an inside centre, and suddenly he's a kicking, passing, running, call-making inside centre, which looks as though he might be absolutely transformative for the All Black backline.
Well, he's a Kiwi whose all-round game and skill set would be superior to many players currently playing international rugby. And in fact, he's quite robotic. He's a punchy piston runner. He's not, he doesn't glide. He's very direct, abrasive, confrontational. But, he's got, what is he, 6'3" and probably about 15.5, 16 stone to go with it. So he's good at fullback, wing, outside centre, inside centre. He could probably play fly half.
Yeah, back row. Yeah.
I mean, just to lob another element into it is that on what we've seen so far this season, Manu, whether he's picked at 12 or 13, and I'd rather see him picked at 12, I must admit, that he's got a lot of headway to make up. He's had a pretty quiet season. So, we're going into a game where, they need him to fire. Against the Scots, there's no question that England need that target man. They need to get on the front foot.
It does.
Didn't Brian O'Driscoll say he's finished in England and move on?
I don't know.
It kind of amazes me sometimes that you have that talent at your disposal. I said it in the column before about Thop and Asinga. Those guys should be carrying the ball 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 times in a game. And if they're not, there's something wrong with your game plan. Massively wrong with it. And after those carries, if they're not being effective after a few games, move on to the next player in line. Because they're not doing the job you want them to do and the job that they're best at, because they're almost in games and you wouldn't know that they played, yet they're some of the biggest players on the field who are not having an impact. Make the change.
It's also worth pointing out just on Farrell that in the end, and some of these games might be tight, he's a 90% goal kicker.
We're not saying drop him, mate.
No.
Yeah, he's a 90% kicker at 10 or at 12. It doesn't matter what shirt number's on his back, does it?
Which is a big old thing, and it gets even bigger at World Cups.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think the Manu thing is obviously interesting, and that's a route we've gone down a lot in the past. I think the way he's playing, Nick, and maybe you agree with this, it's almost like he's holding back, or he's being wrapped in cotton wool, or it's just a get through to the World Cup. And that was what his surgery back last summer was reflective of for me. Was the goal is to get Manu to the World Cup, even if you have to mummify him to do it.
Yeah, I have to say that I sort of think England have got sort of a shortage of big carriers in midfield, but I sort of think that the idea that you can cotton wool somebody through to a World Cup it doesn't make any sense to me. This is the preparation for the World Cup. These are the games that are telling England their direction of travel. And if he's going to be part of that direction of travel, I'd say he needs to be part of it now.
The All Blacks took the cotton wool option in 2007 and got knocked out in the quarterfinals, I seem to remember.
Yeah.
They kept all their players, I mean, all of the All Blacks out of the big games in the run-up to that tournament. They wanted them well rested. And they had plenty of rest for the tournament after the quarterfinal, that was for sure, because they didn't have anything else to do.
Yeah. I mean, do you ever think that winning the World Cup is actually just completely a personnel issue? It's not, is it? It's the cumulative production of game after game, performance after performance, putting together integral systems. Yeah. So no, I agree with you there, Chris. Now, Brendan, one more thing on England, and that's that they have 2 Twickenham games to start, Scotland and Italy. We've been pretty up in the air about the direction England are moving in, but in terms of 2 trial games for Steve Borthwick, it's probably the best start you could ask for, no?
It's a pretty useful start, although it does need to be pointed out that Scotland have only lost once in the last 5 matches against England. They're pretty good against England at the moment. So that's a banana skin at home to Scotland. At the start of the Eddie Jones regime, he rather dismissed Scotland. I don't think, Scotland are very erratic, but you don't dismiss them anymore. They always have a big performance just around the corner. Italy at home should be one of the more comfortable matches if it goes well against Scotland. So yeah, if Steve Borthwick gets away to those 2 wins, England are looking at potentially quite a decent season. That's not a bad start at all for them, but beware Scotland. I mean, as ever, they'll be up for it. And that is a tricky one for England.
And it's a Scotland with Finn Russell very much back in the fold now. Finn has come out and said that his relationship with Gregor Townsend is better than it's ever been. Jerry, do you believe that?
I want to believe it. You look at the way Finn has played, and I believe there's a growing maturity in his game. The way he's not always looking for this miracle pass. He's not always looking to beat players. I feel his frustration a little bit because in a way he's coming from his club side to an international side that the back line might not quite be as good as what he's used to playing and having the talent around him. So that's an interesting point. But I feel mentally he's switched. I think he went on that Lions tour. He wasn't the first choice, and I think he came on started in that 3rd test and made some differences. And I think from there he's gone on and realised that he doesn't have to do the same thing all the time and be this maverick and attack. It's good to the point. You've got to guide your team into the right positions to be able to score. I still think he's got a huge value. I think, again, he's not the quickest, but he can just get his body in the right positions and his legs can take him where he needs to go. So I think he performed well.
Do you think that with Finn, one of the reasons the decreasing maverick levels, to come up with a really mangled English sentence, maybe to do with maturity, just understanding his own game a little bit more, etc. But there must have been a time, probably before Darcy Graham, who's sadly injured and won't be playing, as I understand it, at Twickenham, and Van der Merwe on the other wing. They're pretty potent in their very different ways. But there must have been times when Finn would have looked around that Scottish backline, leaving aside Stuart Hogg, but he's down there at fullback and thinking, well, if it ain't me, I can't see who's going to do anything here. I mean, we're industrious. We work really, really hard. But in terms of the spark of creativity, it was Finn and nothing for a long time, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I think he's come to realise now, particularly with the results against England, how they've kind of, they've won their 3 games. They can't seem to win 4. But I think that's all part of his learning curve. We all want to continue to learn about this game, and it's realizing then, I think you're right, Chris, that he felt he had to do too much or had to do everything. But now when you've got Lions alongside you, they're going to be calling for the ball more. They're going to actually be calming Finn down and probably saying, hey, look, mate, you do this. We can do what you used to do between us. And I think there's enough talent throughout that back line that means that Finn doesn't have to do everything. He just has to create the space in that tight area that allows those runners that you mentioned to exploit.
Trust is a big thing in rugby, isn't it?
It's everything. You know, a good side has it all over from 1 to 23, including the coaches. And yeah, that's a big part of what Borthwick and Sinfield will be trying to create in that England squad. You get that, you can take a team a long way. You don't have to be the most talented. That will get you a long way. Trust.
A lot of talent in that Scottish backline, but that injury to Darcy Graham is sort of standing out like a sore thumb. Who comes in everyone's opinion? This is a question to the floor. We've obviously got the narrative of Rory McConaughey, who has switched nationalities now that he hasn't played for England in 3 years. Nick, I'll come to you. Who would you bring him in on the wing, or would you bring someone else more in the Darcy Graham mould?
No, I don't think I would bring him in. I think that Sean Maitland's been chosen. So, you know, he's very obviously very experienced, still managing to do things for Saracens. Hugh Jones is there knocking around, and he's always, you know, I mean, we saw when he was down at Harlequins last season, he's always dangerous. So I'm not sure that they've got nobody. Chris Harris has played on the wing. I wouldn't expect him to be there because he's too important for them in defence at centre. But you know, I mean, the other. I just think, you know, Van der Merwe, if you're talking about players who do damage to England every time he's played for them, it's him. And Russell, the two of them are the two people who've been consistently the ones when England have gone down the gurgler against the Scots. They've been the guys who've been pulling the strings or finishing the strings. So yeah, I suppose Kinghorn's a bloke who's played on the wing as well. They've got lots of Utes, if you like, who could play on the wing. They've got a guy called it's Kyle Steyn, another South African who played there last season. So they've got options. They've got options, and I thought when Edinburgh played against Saracens and beat them, you saw that Scotland are beginning to build depth. And somebody that we haven't mentioned, who I think's, you know, obviously he's the captain of the side, very important, and he's not a winger, is Jamie Ritchie. You know, I mean, I think that he's one of those guys who does drive them, and they need those sorts of, you know, gritty, slightly niggly figures who get them up, and I think that they'll be up for this game.
He's all sharp edges, isn't he, Ritchie? I think Ritchie could have played in that Scotland back row up at Midfield in 1990, Jared, when you scored a glorious try that resulted in not quite what you wanted. But I mean, he's like a modern day Finlay Calder, John Jeffrey type bloke. He must be an absolute mare to play against.
Yeah, he's out of that mold. Yeah.
We need to move on for time, but I should say that the Rugby Paper Predictions League is back for the Six Nations. And just to run down, we've got a full house of England wins for the prediction for this game, but we're all keeping it to within 10 points with Chris Hewett, 22-20 being the closest of the game. So play along at home, check the Rugby Paper website if you want to find out how the Predictions League works and see how you get along against our columnists and obviously our team of special guests.
I didn't know they were going to be made public, actually. I mean, for somebody who finished second in a one-horse race on many, many occasions, I am entirely useless. So if you do read it, treat it as an exercise in irony.
Well, you're not going to thank me for what I'm about to make public, Chris.
Excellent.
Wales versus Ireland. You've predicted a Wales win, so talk us through that one. First game up, a Gatland Banks. Cardiff in full zoo mode. It will be loud. Wales have gone through a rotten time. I mean, on and off the field. Heaven knows it's been a rocky old ride. I just think that first up, Ireland. They're going to be pretty fully loaded. I mean, Henshaw's missing, but they're going to come fully loaded. But I think Wales are better than they were under Wayne Pibak. I think that
I like the look of their back row. I think Jack Morgan is a terrific prospect. I think that they will get amongst them. Gatland is very, very good at pressing the right buttons on a one-off occasion. I just think, I'm not saying that I would have gone for a Wales win if it had been the last game of the tournament, but first up, I think there'll be a bit of fun and games down there. It'll be much, much closer than people imagine, and it wouldn't amaze me if Wales won that game.
Well, thank you for being a differential. I'll come to you, Jerry, as a sort of antidote to that. You've got Ireland by 26 points in your prediction. So somewhat the other end of the spectrum. Talk us through that narrative then as well.
Well, I've just seen the Welsh side. They don't look that bad. I'm just going that I just can't get over how good a side Ireland are. I think by far they're the most intelligent team in the Six Nations. They just know each other so well. Farrell's got them firing, a bit like I guess Borthwick was hoping Sinfield's going to do for England, but Farrell just gets the best out of those players. And if you mix that with the intelligent rugby brains that they have, I mean, I think De Vlier could take on most teams' back row on his own. He's everywhere, doing everything. He's scoring tries, he's making tackles, he's jackling ball. He is, one of the best players in the world. I mean, it's just incredible. He's amazing. And I think, their weak link might be Sexton, but I think how long have people been saying that? Probably saying he's a bit of a paper bag waiting to be popped, burst, ripped for the last few seasons, because we see him down from time to time, taking a heavy knock, taking a count of 10, 20, 30. But he's resilient, and there'll be no one more enthused to want to put Ireland in a real special place that enables them to go on and be one of the favourites to win the World Cup and possibly win it. So I just think they're too good. They're too well organised. They got the player for player. They're so much better. And I think they're now delivering what is expected of them. And I don't expect them to stop.
Are you predicting an Irish Grand Slam then, Jerry?
No, it's only week one. Come on, steady on. I think, it's between France and Ireland for me. I think we've all mentioned already, there's a big gap I feel between Ireland and France, and then down to England, Scotland and Wales, and then down to Italy. There's a level, they're probably 2 tiers above what England, Scotland and Wales are. Look, and you throw in the mix what the Six Nations has been about. At some stage, quality has got to come to the top. And the 2 best teams are Ireland and France, and the other 4 have got to grow in and try and catch up. And it's a long way to catch up.
I certainly can't see Ireland losing in Dublin. That's for sure. I don't think they lose there.
Well, I've got them down to lose to France in Dublin. So
I was just about to say, I think I remembered someone had that down. Nick, I'll make you talk us through that in a week or so's time. How about that? But no, Jerry, I only asked you that because Brendan has predicted an Irish Grand Slam. All of our predictions are already submitted, so there's no going back from our point of view.
Can I just say on my predictions, by the way, guys, I got sent a bottle of Donegal whiskey from a friend, and I was sampling it the night I did the predictions, and it got a bit weird at the end. I've actually got Wales having a whitewash and Italy finishing above them. But Wales are the enigma. I mean, they're like the old France. You don't know what Wales is going to turn up. They either win the championship or Grand Slam or finish 5th. Historically, that's what they do. So this first match is massive. If they win it, they'll have a good season. If they lose, and I expect them to lose narrowly, they could have a very tough season. I can see them losing 3 or 4 matches. And on the theory that I think Italy will win 1 match this season, I think they will target Wales at home. This was the logic seeping through the whiskey. I've got Italy beating Wales at home towards the end of the tournament and maybe jumping above and not finishing last for once. But it's a very old Wales team. Was it 12 of the 23 over 30? 8 of that squad played in the 2012 Six Nations. it'll either work spectacularly well under Gatland and it'll be another sort of miracle season, or it's going to be a very, very tough season. There's going to be no in between with Wales this season.
Yeah, I was going to say there's in the predictions league, and obviously I've got access to all the predictions that the public don't yet have, but no team has divided quite like Wales has. Obviously, Chris has got Wales beating Ireland, then Brendan's got Italy beating Wales, then Nick's got Wales beating England. So if all of them come through, then that's a hell of a story for Wales throughout the tournament. But yeah, like you said, 10 players with 50 caps or more, 3 with 100 or more, and then 1 with a 150 or more. I guess, Nick, there's the possibility that, Welsh rugby has just come full circle, and then that could either mean that in a very good way, i.e. the peak of the Gatland era, or a very bad way in that if you're not moving forwards, you're moving backwards.
I don't see it being a disastrous season. I don't think that it's going to be a Wales whitewash. And I don't think that Italy will beat them in Rome. I think that Italy have improved. There's no question about that they've improved, but whether they've made enough to get off that, to get out of that wooden spoon slot is another question. I think with Wales, I do find it strange that they keep going back to Alan Wynne. I think that, if we're talking about, we talked about, or somebody mentioned that Brian O'Driscoll had said maybe time for England to move on from Tuilagi. I certainly think that if Alan Wynne is still the, one of the 2 best test locks, then, you can continue to pick him. But I'm not sure that that has been the case. He played...
I think he'd have been on the bench, Nick, wouldn't he, if Rowlands had been fit?
Yeah. But, I'm not convinced that Wales are going to be anybody's whipping boys in this. I think that they've got enough good players to win home games. And if you look at the Wales games against England recently, whether it's been Gatland or Pivac, whomever, there's very little in them. And it's tended to go with home advantage. So that's why I've gone for Wales in that.
You can tell the tenor, can't you, in advance of the Wales team talks, because Warren Gatland has already said this Netflix documentary, Fly on the Wall thing's a bad idea because you can't say what you really want to say about other countries. That's an interesting approach, I think.
Oh, hopefully he doesn't pay any mind and just carries on.
12's a problem position for Wales, isn't it? And they have picked, Jerry, you said you've just seen a team. They picked Joe Hawkins at 12, 20 years old. Nick Tompkins is not a very Warren Gatland type 12, is he? I.e., he doesn't fit the Jamie Roberts. He's abrasive, but he's obviously not as big as Jamie Roberts, doesn't give you that go forward. Who would be your 12? I think I read in Wales Online that George North could potentially be the key and move inside to 12. And, Jamie Roberts was initially a fullback / wing and then moved further inside. Do you think that could work? And if not, who would be your 12?
I think Gatland he shouldn't ignore him. He's a player who makes Wales tick when he's playing well. And he doesn't quite fit the mould, I'll give you that. But I wish Tompkins had stuck with England. I think he could be doing a job for England right now. So, yeah, you've got the option of moving a big unit in, haven't you? And Wales have never been frightened of doing that. And they might come round to it. But, Hawkins was very good for the under-20s last year. He is a talent. Ospreys are going well. Why not? Let's give it a go. But I don't think Gatland will hesitate to make a big change there if it's not working.
The massive question for Gatland, surely, is how he gets the best out of this Welsh side with the limitations in certain positions that it has without Sean Edwards. That's the big thing. If there's a massive bridge for Warren to cross in test level coaching, is to do it without Sean, who meant an enormous amount to that Welsh team, and we can see what he's done in France. So that's the big bridge for him to cross, I think.
I think Wales suffer from the same problem as England and possibly Scotland. Their forwards just aren't punchy enough. So you can have an amazing backline, but they're not punchy. They're not winning enough collisions. Look, guys, we all watched the game. South Africa are brutes. They just muscle themselves over the game line, but they run with some conviction. New Zealand can be small, but they just know how to run, and they run at space and take the weaker spot. Aussies are pretty good footballers, so again, they can choose their spot. When you've got this side, Wales and England, they're packs. They've got to play to get dominant and to win collisions. They've got to play each player. If you score them out of 10, they've got to be playing a minimum of 7, but you want that minimum to be 8 for them to have any kind of momentum, any kind of dominance, and any kind of opportunity to produce quick ball. Quick ball wins you games. If you haven't got forwards who win collisions, you're not going to win games. You're always going to be under pressure, and you're always going to be kicking. Always. And I look at this Welsh pack, and you look, the reason why they haven't won games is because their pack, their pack isn't playing well. Any side that are losing games, their packs aren't playing well. They're just not pokey enough, punchy enough, abrasive enough. Everyone can win a scrum. Wales might struggle to even win line-outs. But these are elementary parts of the game that they practice day in, day out. It's the outside, it's the breakdown, it's what you do off that, it's what you create, how you carry ball aggressively into contact to win the collision. And this pack hasn't been doing it, and maybe Gatland can get them to start doing it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because although it is a level down, I think the Ospreys have made an impact in the European Cup that none of the Welsh regions have, I don't think, for a while. And he's picked quite a few of those Ospreys players. And one bloke who will give them that go forward, we've touched on him a bit earlier on, is this kid, Jack Morgan. Tipperick is also playing extremely well. I think you're probably right about the front 5 forwards, because they don't have the same, Ken Owens is now, he certainly had it in the past, but whether he's still got it, in terms of carrying abilities, another question. But they do have some, Jack Morgan's certainly somebody, and the guy at Exeter, Chris Chizuna, if he gets an opportunity as well, these are guys who can carry. So I think that
David Jenkins he's quite lean, but he's on the bench, isn't he?
Yeah.
When he gets the ball, he makes good yardage. He really, he's quick, and he's 17 stone. He's not particularly muscular, but he makes good yardage.
And Gatland, since he's been around since 1953, it's asking a bit much. But it's not impossible that Faletau will string together 3 or 4 extraordinary games.
We're asking these players, we're talking about these players at their very best, and which they've struggled to show us, or anyone, in the last couple of seasons. So you're talking about reincarnation. They might do it for 1 or 2 games. You cannot see them producing it at this age that most of them are, for 5 games in the Six Nations, and then carry that on to 3 warm-up games in a World Cup. I think we're reminiscing a little bit here.
We're reminiscing about Gatland's previous incarnation down there, aren't we? That was the thing. He maximised the sum of their parts. Remarkably.
No one's going to dispute what Gatland can produce and what he's done. His track record says he's a winner. And I'm not by any means, any stretch of the imagination, saying Wales are out of this. I just don't see them being able to be competitive for 5 games in the Six Nations, not on what they've shown us.
No, not 5 games. I'd agree with that, but I certainly think that they'll be. I think they'll be competitive, and I think that they're going to win. Gatland's always had the ability to blend teams, to bring players through, and I think that he'll start to bring some players through. And as I've mentioned, I think that if we look out for a forward to make an impact during this Six Nations, I think Jack Morgan will certainly be one of them. And but they probably need more. There's no question about that, and I'm sure that he'll be scouring everywhere to see whether he can unearth a few more as well.
And they've only got 2 games at home, I think.
Yeah.
So that makes it even tougher for them.
Yeah.
Well, for this weekend, we've got 3 Ireland wins and 1 Wales win in our set of predictions. Oh, sorry, 4 Ireland wins and 1 Wales win in our predictions. So, well, yeah, Cardiff will be bubbling, and obviously with recent allegations in the Welsh Rugby Union, which we won't go into, Welsh Rugby is in need of an upwards turn. Let's move on finally to France-Italy. France have had a couple of injuries, Brendan, haven't they? Jonathan Danty, and to me, the changes seem fairly clear there. Ficou moves to 12 and Mofana goes to 13. Cameron Woki is a little bit more difficult. Who comes into the road, do you think?
Well, that is offset by the fact that Willemse is now fit again, so I think he's back in the pack. And Woki hasn't been playing that well at club level, although I think he probably is a test beast more than anything. France is interesting. I think they beat Italy. Italy sometimes play pretty well against France. They've actually got 2 wins against them in the Six Nations, and they tend not to roll over too much against the French. First up in Rome, I think there'll be a big enthusiastic crowd. I can see Italy giving it a good old rattle and maybe scoring a couple of good tries. But, France have got a mighty outfit. They'll weather the storm and pull away, I'm sure. But no, that'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to see Ange Capuzzo again, see if he's still got the magic touch. And just to mention for another Italian lad, get his name right, Tommaso Menoncello, who actually this time last year got a very good try against France in Paris. He pulled it down. You remember, way out wide, pulled it down and got the touchdown somehow. He got a couple of belters for Benetton against Stade the other day. I saw some quotes from Paul Gustard saying he was one of the biggest talents he's ever worked with, and he's still only 20. So, I don't think they're going to be a one-man show behind the scrum. I think Minozzi's coming back to form and fitness. He might get a start. Tommaso Allen, our friend from the podcast, is not going too badly at Quins. He might have a good comeback season. So I've got hopes for Italy, but I don't think they'll be starting with a win against the French.
The big lift for Italy is the fact that Garbisi, who I think is, to my mind, is the best outside half they've had since Dominguez, is suddenly back in the squad. And whether he plays this weekend, I don't know. He's been injured, but the word from Italy is that he's proved his fitness, so to speak. Whether he's proved it to the extent that he starts, I don't know, but that'll be a big lift for them, actually. And also, I think that Kieran Crowley's doing a brilliant job there. I mean, he kept Canada's head above water to a degree for a long, long time when they have nothing really for him to work with. There's a lot more for him to work with in Italy. Yeah. But I don't expect them to beat France. France have got 5 or 6 players who've been in conversation for a World 15 at the moment. I mean,
I was going to say, we were talking about who replaces Woki. Well, I can think of, they've got this bloke Thibaut Flamand who was at Loughborough and then at Wasps for a bit. I reckon, just in terms of ability, speed around the field for a lock, size, athleticism, and then Sekou Makalu, who runs as fast as most wing plays in the back row.
They played on the wing.
They both have Woki qualities, don't they? But both of the players you've mentioned. Yeah. I mean, Woki is an extraordinary athlete. I think he could be extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. But I don't think they'll necessarily miss him as horrendously as they would if he pulled out the World Cup.
No.
Yeah.
I'm going to put everyone on the spot a little bit just before we wrap up, and I would like a tournament winner prediction, a one to watch prediction, and a shock of the tournament prediction. I'm going to come to Nick first.
Thought you were going to say that. What do we want?
You know me so well.
We want a winner. We want a winner first. Okay.
Yeah, winner.
Winner Ireland. Not with a Grand Slam, but on points. Yeah. Next one. What was it?
One to watch. A player, not a team.
Yeah. Okay. I've mentioned him already. Jack Morgan. I'd say one to watch, definitely.
Okay. And shock of the tournament?
Shock of the tournament. Well, if you consider France winning in Ireland, France winning in Ireland.
We'll stick with that. Jerry, can I come to you next?
The winners, I would go with France. The player to watch, I will go with Ollie Collins. I think young Mal's going to be very expressive, and I think he shouts for the ball. And I think if he gets it enough, he'll have a decent impact. There are no shocks. I don't think that the shock would be if Italy beat anybody other than Wales.
Okay, Chris.
I think both Ireland and France win 4 games. I think Ireland will probably sneak it on a bonus point. I think they might beat France at home more comfortably than Wales beat Ireland in Cardiff on Saturday, which of course is my shock result, by the way. So I've answered 2 questions in a single sentence there. And my player to watch, I think will probably be Alan Wynne-Jones. Could go far.
And lastly, Brendan, wrap us up.
Well, I've gone for Ireland for the Grand Slam. I was sort of surprised myself at the end of doing these predictions and added it up, and Ireland got the Grand Slam and Wales were bottom. One to watch. He's been a good player for 2 or 3 years. He doesn't get the recognition. Italy second row, Federico Ruzza. He ought to be a number 8. He's a hell of an athlete. He wins all their line-out ball. Without him, Italy are absolutely sunk. Great player. Look out for Luke Crosby. Now, he's not even a guaranteed starter for Scotland because they've got good strength in the back row. But I've been very impressed with him in the 2 matches against Saracens. He's a Jason White to my eyes. So if he gets a game time, he'll impress. And the shock, well, I've already alluded. I think Italy might get their 1 win against Wales at home.
Could I just mention one thing, because I wasn't really serious about Alan Wynne-Jones being a player to watch. I do think that Ben White might be a very, very good player in the making. And I'd be, if he gets a decent number of runs, or he gets a decent amount of time on the pitch during the Six Nations, I think he may well be quite eye-catching.
That's a good one. Do you think he'll actually get a chance this Six Nations?
There are people in Scotland who think he'll be picked ahead of Ali Price.
Okay, that would be very interesting.
But whether that's first up or deeper into the tournament, who knows? But he looks as though he has a bit about him.
Yeah.
He's got a golden touch, hasn't he? Things happen when he plays.
Scotland have just such a fantastic tradition in scrum halves, and if this bloke lives up even 80% to what's gone before, and then he'll be a handful.
Well, on the France-Italy front, we've got a full house of France wins in the Predictions League. The Predictions League always fascinates me, especially now that the 4 of us, Jerry apart, have submitted all our predictions for the entire rounds. Jerry, you're on a team with Scott Hastings, Jonathan Davis, Will Greenwood, and a couple of others. So stay tuned, and obviously you can play along at home. Jerry, you at Twickenham this weekend?
I am. I'm very much looking forward to it. I left after the South African game just frustrated, disappointed, and genuinely was not in any rush to go back and watch a live game. Would have preferred to watch it on TV. So if they were playing poorly, I could just turn over or switch it off. Yeah. But now with the change of coach, I like what I'm hearing. I like the messages about Sinfield. And I'm very much looking forward to the match at Twickenham. I can't wait.
More reason for optimism. Well, thank you very much for joining us again. And enjoy Twickenham on Saturday. And let's hope for an end to the England-Scotland rock, as someone said 1 in 5. So let's hope for an England win to get the Six Nations and the Steve Borthwick era, started in the right way. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper Podcast, and don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe through our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.